That was the fuel, right, that I just felt.
Somebody said no, basically.
Yeah, and I felt like, I'm not doing this any longer for me. I'm not going to go back to Danbury. I just gave up on it, but I didn't want other people to go through the same thing. So once they said no, I really went home and started thinking. I'm like, I think I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to fight this because something is just inherently wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't want the story that I went through to repeat itself.
And liftoff.
Hey everybody, welcome to Mission Control. This is your host, Ramon Peralta with Peralta Design, and we launch brands. And we've got a very illuminating, exciting episode because we have the one and only Lucas Pimentel, the founder and CEO of LEAD. Welcome to the show.
Gracias, Ramon.
Yes, today, guys, we're going to learn some amazing things. I think right now the climate is ripe for more community organizing, and this is a man that has done some amazing things. And we're going to learn about doing the impossible. Just when you're faced with adversity, what do you do? How do you take action? You've managed to organize the community. You're an amazing community leader. You're the kind of guy, I mean, when you say you're going to do something, you do it. And I want you to share with our audience and our listeners just how you came about with this concept. What is it? How important is it? Tell us about LEAD.
Well, LEAD stands for Latinos for Educational Advocacy and Diversity. It was born of an idea that the Latino community was not united. And in the area of advocacy, we were sorely lacking. We were one of the largest growing demographics, but in representation and voice, we didn't really have a voice. So I started with this idea that we needed to unify the Latino people.
Absolutely. And I know you faced a lot of walls. Like you kept being, you were fighting for a charter school, I believe. Tell me about that, because I think that kind of was the nucleus, or you guys just kind of got fed up and said, I'm taking matters into my own hands.
Yeah, so I was basically a teacher most of my life, and I was about to retire soon. I was getting a buyout, so I said, hey, after I'm 50, I'm going to go to Dominican Republic. We built a school in Barahona, and I thought that was going to be the path. So I was helping a group of parents that wanted an educational option in Danbury, and that was called the Prospect Charter School. It was a project to bring a charter school from Brooklyn into Danbury, which is the only large city that doesn't have one. My job was as a consultant, as a volunteer. I was just helping that group of parents organize so that they can get that school. They got approved October 3rd, 2018, and then a legislator blocked the funding for the school. And that was something that I just couldn't believe, because I said, I voted for that person and I supported that person. So then I decided to contact them and say, hey, what's going on? This is something that we need. This is the first time that a charter school was asked for by the Latino community. Most of them had been led by African Americans or Anglo-Saxons that have open schools. But this is the first time ever that the Latino community said, we need this. And about 68% of the students in Danbury were Latino. So when I met with this legislator, basically was like, we're never going to open that school no matter what you do. And I couldn't take that. I couldn't believe that me, myself, had been a victim of Danbury. I started teaching in 1997, and I worked in Bridgeport 23 years. So why am I driving an hour away when 68% of Danbury students are Latinos? You don't need me? And it was just not me. It was a dozen Latinos that were driving hours away. One of them, a Dominican friend of mine, was in Korea and just stayed there. He went to teach English, never came back. But it was pretty sad, right? So
yeah.
that was the fuel, right, that I just felt.
Somebody said no, basically.
Yeah, and I felt like, I'm not doing this any longer for me. I'm not going to go back to Danbury. I just gave up on it, but I didn't want other people to go through the same thing. So once they said no, I really went home and started thinking. I'm like, I think I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to fight this because something is just inherently wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't want the story that I went through to repeat itself.
Right. And I do want to introduce your sidekick for the day, Mr. Secondino Paolino. Welcome back to Mission Control.
Thank you, Ramon. It's wonderful to be back here and joining this incredible force that we have next.
Yeah, absolutely. This guy's a bundle of energy.
Absolutely.
He's the Energizer Bunny, the Dominican version,
And
with the
that's all.
tambora.
And the
Yeah,
plátano.
and the plátano.
Platanazo puro.
Right,
Yes.
right. And we've got Jorge on the soundboard.
How's it going, everyone?
Yes, he's filling in for Kev. And, we're keeping Kevin in our thoughts and prayers. Those listeners out there, we're hoping for a speedy recovery for our dear friend Kevin. Did want to acknowledge him, and let's get back to this next step, because I think many people would have stopped there. You get told no, you just say, okay, I hit a dead end. How does one go about coming up with a name? Starting a nonprofit? Like, who did you tell first? Have you done this before, or did you just start winging it? Did you Google it? What did you do?
So the first thing, I had no clue how to do it, but I know that I wanted to do it because I was just a teacher. And again, 23 years in the classroom, I realized that the first thing I needed to do was learn about that kind of field, right? That's one of the things I always try to tell people to do is if you want to jump careers or do something, become an expert in that field. So I took the first 3-4 months just learning everything about charters, then the laws and how things worked, because that was something that I didn't know. I didn't know the process. I figured out that Connecticut has a dual process. It's the only state in the nation. Charter schools get approved, and then they have to go get for funding. So you make communities do all this, and then you have to now decide, and somebody can block your funding. That was something that I didn't know about. So I started learning about it. And then one of the things I said is I need a firsthand experience. So I asked my school if I can get a 1-year sabbatical. I knew that because of the years that I had worked in, they owed me the ability to at least take a year off. And it wasn't a complete jump off the cliff, but I said, I get a year off. I'm going to go work for this charter school that is trying to open as a community engagement coordinator. And I'm going to learn everything that has
was
to
smart.
do. And that was my first thing, was like, let me get my feet wet. I knew I wanted to create my own thing, but I wanted to get experience. So I took a 1 year working as a community engagement coordinator for that charter school. And that's where I was able to get the knowledge to then say, okay, now I'm ready to be independent and launch my own
Just
thing.
as an aside, was that a step back as far as career goals or salary goals, to do that in order to invest? And I'm only getting at that because I don't think a lot of people would be willing to do that. Yeah. Was it a lateral move, or like, did you take less pay, but you just knew that this is what you had to do to learn?
It was a massive hit because although I was going to get the same salary, I was 2-3 years away from a buyout.
Okay.
So if I kept my job until I was 50.
What does that mean? Like an early retirement or a pension or
so
something?
for teachers, sometimes when you're making the highest, what they do is they buy 5 years of your contract so that you can retire at the highest level.
Okay.
So that was almost like a $6,000 a month for the rest of my life.
Right.
Which
Not bad.
Not bad living in Dominican
In certain
Republic.
countries, that's millions of dollars.
Yeah, which was all my dream. My dream was my school, chickens, and goats. So I was all set. And then I realized that if I jumped off, I would lose that. I would probably get like $2,500 a year instead of $6,000, which would be a massive hit. I mean, you could think to as an investor, how much would you have to invest to get a clean net return of $6,000 a month? It was a pretty sizable chunk. But I still ended up doing it because I just felt like it was a new calling. Right. I thought that I had a plan since I was 20, and somehow this thing came and it was just eating me up inside that I needed to do something. And I knew that it was an economic hit for the future, that I was not going to have that set income. At 50 years old, being able to get a $6,000 a month doing anything, already being young and continue to do stuff, I thought that was a pretty good thing. And I gave that up just because I felt that for the passion. And now I look back and it opened up a lot more doors.
It did.
Than I could ever imagine.
And I think you got to be a visionary too. I think, tell me about how did you take a napkin out and like start sketching out how this organization was going to be? Because somehow it went from the charter school to this community center that has now popped up all around the state. You have 5 locations now.
Yeah. So I did a year of that sabbatical.
Yeah.
And I learned, and then I said, now I'm ready to launch this. So it was a napkin. So I took a napkin, and
It's always a napkin.
I had this little
don't know.
napkin.
Greatest ideas are born on napkins.
And I'm having coffee, in Starbucks, and I just saying like, and I drew a little star, and then I drew another one. I just kept playing with napkins, and then I said, okay, I want like a symbol, So I'm like, I think education's the core of what we want to do. So I said, I want to do a stack of books. The books is going to be a staircase. And there's going to be a little person. There's actually going to be me reaching for my dream.
It does look like you.
Yeah.
He's bald.
He is. Right. And then he's got a little graduation cap, and he's reaching for the star. And then, I came up with that. And then I said, I wanted to be about education, and I want to be about advocacy, because a lot of the other groups that we've seen, we just know they got community centers, they got cultural centers, but never like a Latino advocacy group. So I called it Latinos for Educational Advocacy and Diversity, meaning that we're going to do everything that we're going to advocate is going to go through education. But the diversity part was that eventually Latino was going to be the core, that we were going to, like the niche.
Right.
But then we were going to bring other groups as allies.
I love it, because I've seen you got like Mosaic. I mean, you have, and that kind of becomes a catch basin for all the other ethnic groups that are marginalized or disadvantaged. And you can welcome more people, serve more people. It's amazing. So right after these words, we're going to get more into your story. I want to know, like, the Dominican journey. The Torta Monja and all that other stuff you like to have to eat. It's actually a pastry for those that are bilingual, so don't misconstrue that piece. And we want to hear about just scaling, hiring. Like you've got leaders like Ramona here in Bridgeport. Like you've hired really good people to run these centers, and they're serving a tremendous amount of people in our community. So we want to learn more right after these words.
At Peralta Design, social causes are very important to us. One of our trusted community partners and clients is Catalyst CT. Catalyst CT believes in social change that creates a lasting impact on community well-being. Catalyst CT tackles the tough issues that youth, families, and communities often face by preventing street violence, mediating and resolving conflict, improving school climate, boosting mental health, and planting the seeds for a healthy, safe, and restorative life. For more information on Catalyst CT, visit catalystct.org.
We want brains.
And we're back. Please help me welcome once again Lucas Pimentel and Secundino Paulino. They're going crazy. They've been camped out. They've been camped out all down the Cinto complex here.
Hey, Ramon, es Pimentel.
Pimentel.
You're saying it like a white guy.
Pimentel.
Pimentel.
Yeah. How about Pimentel?
Pimienta, or maybe pimienta.
Or mental. Let's just drop the P and just leave the mental.
It comes from pigment sales.
Pigment sales.
They used to sell pigment for clothes.
And Paulino as well. Gringo. This is his first generation.
Paulino.
Paulino.
Hey, Paulino.
Hey,
pal.
I had a kid that was like, it's Garcia.
Garcia, oh boy.
I'm like, Garcia? No, Garcia.
No. We don't say that.
No,
we don't say that around here.
We correct that real quick.
Yeah.
Stay connected.
You from the hood?
Right.
We'll have to do that rap again for our listeners.
As a closer right there.
As a closer.
Mm-hmm.
As a closer. So listen, you got this idea, you wrote it on a napkin, but where do you get the money?
So I think that's the most important part, right? It's all about connections. Mm-hmm. It's all about getting people to trust you and to be valuable to them. And I think that year that I was working was all about me doing more than they ever asked me to do. So if I was just supposed to be doing community organizing, I would also be, setting up other networks and other things that had nothing to do with my actual job. But I was constantly saying, let me write an op-ed, let me do websites, let me do social media. And
you're putting out content.
Constantly impressing them when they were like, oh, you were supposed to just, organize 40, 50 people. I will bring 500. You were supposed to just do a couple of things, and I would do a massive rally at the Green. I was always thinking, how can I do more so that I'm not just a normal employee?
What makes you so magnetic and dynamic? What, as a leader, why do you think people...
I think it's when you have a deep belief in something.
Yeah.
people see that and it's contagious and it's doesn't look fake.
Absolutely.
So the first thing I wanted to do was like, how do I get funders, the people that are actually going to pay for my dream, to trust me? Because usually it's invitation only. These people are not, you cannot apply, you cannot find them anywhere. But with my work, I was able to be exposed to these people. I went to galas, I went to a lot of networking events, and they got to know me. I got to talk about what I was doing. And that's how I started creating a network of people that was like, wow, he's doing things that are different. And this is somebody that we should watch out for. So then I started approaching people. I said, I created my swag. You have to have a presentation. So from my napkin, I made a logo, myself in Canva, and then made a T-shirt. So
I know a couple guys, by the way, that do logos.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a pretty good effort, actually.
It was.
considering
And
it
it's still there.
It's holding on.
And it's holding on.
He's made it work.
But I made a T-shirt, just one. I told them, hey, give me a sample, and then I'll say, don't want to buy 100 of them in case it doesn't work. So I have a T-shirt. I have a little flyer with some ideas.
Yeah.
And then I started doing my pitches. I started having these conversations to funders until I found, a pretty good funder that, I showed them and I said, look, I have everything planned out. And the cool thing is I have a girlfriend who's now my wife that does the same thing, graphic designs and things like that. So she made me a landing page. She made me all of those things that made my presentation more real. If I just showed up with words, it would not have been the same. But when I was showing them the websites, when I was showing them the flyers and all of the concepts and all of the visual aids, that really got them like, oh, you really have worked on this and you really have thought this through. Mm-hmm. That's what gave them the confidence to say, I think we're going to take a chance on this person. And I had created the 5 pillars of LEAD, right? Educational options. So we were going to fight for charter schools, financial literacy, civic engagement, history and culture, health. And we were talking about how we were going to help the communities in each one. And a new concept to say, in advocacy, we're going to serve to advocate. Instead of just one or the other, most people you're just an advocacy organization or you're like the United Way and you serve. You're not both. And I say, I want to do both. I don't want to just sit there advocating and 3 years later, if I don't get a law or a bill passed, I have nothing. So we were able to get the first funding, and we actually opened in June 28th of 2021. We're not even 4 years old. We're about to have, and everybody's invited to the 4-year anniversary gala.
Wow.
This April.
It's amazing how much you've done in that short time.
Yeah,
It really is.
to grow. And what was exciting about it was that once we started with that team, it was just 3 of us, and we were in a small office. From then, we were able to actually do the same thing. Like, let's do more than we were asked to do. Every year, if we say in our grant that we were going to do X, we try to do that 2 or 3 times bigger. And we kept impressing. So after the first year, we were already doing so many impactful work that we started this idea of creating community centers. So the first community center was in Danbury. Then we went to Norwich, Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, New Britain, Hartford. We're now in 7 locations across the state with a plan to be in 10. And we expanded now to 20-something employees. So it's been a meteoric rise from that. And then more funders and more people are kind of seeing the work we're doing. And we spoke to some funders that are national, and they said, we haven't seen anything like this anywhere in the country. The way that you're doing it, the way you're mobilizing people, but we're helping people constantly. It's like a financial literacy workshops, and you've done a few of those.
And the class, you have literal classrooms in these centers where people are learning English or naturalization.
Yeah. So everything you could imagine, we are doing it in our centers with partners like Yale, New Haven, like you said, classes of anything women empowerment. So the community now feels like we're a resource. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, we educate and say, we register people to vote. We do campaigns. Right now, we're going to do a class to get 20 leaders prepared to run for office every year, a cohort.
That's awesome.
And we know enough from our communities, because most people don't run because that thing looks complicated.
Yeah,
and it's really hard.
Yeah.
So we're demystifying, and every time we're just pushing the envelope. We also apply for our own charter schools, because I said, we advocate for charter schools, but I have an idea of my own. And I said, the future is Latino and the future is AI. How do I encapsulate those? So we had a Latino-centric, AI-powered community school that will be wraparound services for that. And it would help everyone, because who wouldn't want to understand this massive demographic, who they are, their language, what ticks. But then we have a partnership with the University of Arizona so that these kids graduate with an associate's in advanced AI. I mean, revolutionizing the idea. We apply for 2 schools at the same time, which is never done. And that's part of my calling card. Like, let's just do something to push the envelope. And they said, you should do one, that would be enough. I'm like, no, I'm going for both. And we got both approved. So 3 months ago, we got one approved in Waterbury, one approved in New Haven.
Congratulations.
And those are amazing. We also said we're going to need a pipeline for all these schools.
Yeah.
So we launched also the North Star Fellowship, which is a fellow program that is going to take leaders from our communities and is going to basically pay them for 2 years so that they can build their own models, and we can continue to do that. Because I have a deep belief that we have to have our own institutions. We have to create our own things. We're always asking for a seat at the table, and sometimes I say, why don't we just make our own table, and then we'll give seats to other people, right? It's always this idea of begging. Can you give me something? Can I get a scrap? And I said, we need to start building our own things, and I think that's what has separated where we are, and that's where LEAD is now.
It's incredible. It's an incredible journey, and I know for you this might be routine, but when you expand and you say, I'm going to Danbury, or you started in Danbury, but when you go to Norwich or Waterbury or Bridgeport, do you send a team that's looking for vacant property? Do you contact City Hall? Like, logistically, what are the steps to expansion? And then do you identify a building and purchase it, or are you guys leasing, or how's that all working?
What's weird is that is something that I enjoy. I don't know if I was a realtor in my other life.
Yeah.
So I actually take that part of the work myself. I like to kind of scope out the city myself.
Yeah.
I go and, sometimes with a realtor, check out properties, but I always like to see it and envision it, like, would this be the right place?
Yeah.
And I just start kind of imagining people coming in, and usually there's a place that I'm like, this is it. And once I know that's it, then I get all the experts, figure out, let's negotiate, if we have to do floors and build it. We were thinking before of purchasing versus renting, but the way that our grants work, because they're in cycle, it gets hard, right, for you to get into these massive locked in things when you probably get funding every 2 or 3 years, like in cycles. So it just made more sense to rent for now.
Right.
But there's still a possibility for us to be able to eventually purchase all these buildings. But I think that we probably want to be at least 5 years old till we start buying all of these things.
I think you've proven that you're here to stay, and that you're real and you're making an impact. There's so much talk in the news with, like, all the federal grants and stuff being cut. Does that affect you, or are you more state grant or a mix?
Yeah, so we usually are just private grants for now. It's very complicated to deal with state grants. I think one time we were trying to get some city grants, and it took 1.5 years, and it was like 1,000 sheets of work. So 99% of our funding is just private grants and private donations, which has been carrying us through. I think in the future, you can open that up, but we don't want to get too far away from the core of what we do. Right. And some of these federal or state grants just have, too many cumbersome things on it that take you away from that. And it's just a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of politics. So we've basically been operating mostly on private foundation grants.
All right, excellent. So I do want to end with some, like, success stories, but before we get to those stories, I know you're a history buff. You got like knowledge about everything, which is very admirable. I don't know, you have like a photographic memory, because it's like when you describe this with that passion you have, military battles and such, you can almost reenact it, in your mind, which is incredible, an incredible talent. So I can imagine how great of a history teacher you were. Tell us your history. Tell us a bit about young Lucas Pimentel and how you came to be this amazing community leader.
And that's a great part. Excited about it. I've written 3 books, which I have not published yet, because somehow I think it's an issue between being the creative and then being like the business person. And sometimes you either got to get a team or get organized, because I think sometimes I love the creative part. I like sometimes, also when you, as an artist, you just want to get in there. Someone says, now, how are you going to distribute it and sell it? And I'm like, come on, I just want to paint another painting. Yeah. So sometimes I find myself writing in a book after book, and I have not, yet done the other step. But one of the things that I want to do, I think once I retire, because I don't want to give too much ammunition to some of the opponents of the work that I do for now. But that biography starts, my family really comes from a very political, historical family where my grandfather was one of the richest and most powerful men in Dominican Republic. And he was murdered by the dictatorship of Trujillo. And it was actually by his son, Ramfis Trujillo. And my grandfather did not want to sell a property that was very valuable because it was one of the ancestral properties since the encomienda times of the Spanish. Wow. So my grandfather was like, I'll sell you anything, but not like the home ancestral land of my family.
The sacred ground.
And then they shot him in the back of the head in front of my father and threw him down the ditch. And you're talking about very powerful man. In the book from the Hermanas Mirabales, you see that in their chapter, they said, when they killed that powerful business person, we realized that now the dictatorship was killing everybody.
That's in the Time of the Butterflies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
They mentioned my grandfather there because all of these business people were allied with the dictatorship. You could not be that wealthy if you weren't. But if you did anything that they displeased them, that happened. But that was the first time when they took someone of that prominence and just killed them. And that showed you that even Trujillo liked to send a message, but his son ended up getting a little bit more, reckless and not caring. Like, how dare you tell me no? And normally Trujillo probably would have said, like, you're not going to kill one of our top allies in that region. But they did murder my grandfather, and that caused a slew of issues because he had 36 children. That's a little crazy.
It's like my grandfather.
That's the world that it was in. So this 6'5" guy dressed in white with a open Cadillac, supervising the plantations and all that. It was back in those times. So he had 12 kids with my grandma, and then the rest was just Pimentels. There's a Ariel La Vega and stuff that everybody's related to me. Everybody's a primo. And then
O primo se prima.
The army was concerned because they're like, the guy we killed can now cause a revolution. So they sent the secret police to the funeral. They started having everybody kind of checked in. So my family then grew up, all those sons and stuff, feeling really bitter and connecting Trujillo to the American kind of, hemisphere of influence during the Cold War because they knew that dictator was supported by that. Then we had the President Juan Bosch, who was the first Democratic elected president ever. And then he gets ousted by the guy that was running, Trujillo's government, Balaguer. So in that, you have a civil war, the Civil War. Some of my uncles and stuff participated in that when the United States invaded with 65,000 soldiers, Lyndon Johnson, in 1965. And that was like the context of all that because after the guy that was Trujillo's right-hand man ended up winning the election, and the guy that was first democratically elected only did a year or two, and he was exiled. There was the 12 years of Balaguer, where basically he was like, we're just going to kill every single person that could ever be a threat again, but we're not going to do it like Trujillo, putting a sign. You just disappear. Mm-hmm. So the fear now was that everybody that was involved in any of those kind of guerrilla movements or that had supported los constitucionalistas, which were the ones fighting the dictatorship, they all had to leave. So my dad was sent to the hills to hide from another friend, which is my other grandfather, who was the big coffee guy. So my father from my grandfather from my father's side that was murdered, it was cattle, rice, things like that. And then the hills, the big coffee baron was my other grandfather. But they knew each other, the families. So the grandma said, I need to send you hotheads, one to Puerto Rico. Everybody was sent to Panama, to Spain.
Exile.
My father was sent into the mountains and said, Efrain will protect you there. That's where he met my mom. My mom was a 16-year-old lady, again, different times. And, they fell in love and got married. And he decided that he couldn't live in Dominican Republic with his family. So they were almost, he self-exiled himself to Venezuela. So he was living in Venezuela, and most of my older siblings were born in Venezuela. I actually was born in the Dominican Republic because my mom, when she was pregnant with me, she went back to Dominican Republic because my grandma was sick. So she had me in the Dominican Republic. But I have a brother that still lives in Venezuela who was born there. my dad went through a lot of craziness through that because seeing his father died, a lot of issues. So my mom left him. She immigrated to the United States. I came here in 1984, right? But before that, she left me with my grandfather for like 4 years. And tough times because my grandfather is 86-year-old. He had a glass eye. He had an accident, had one eye. So he was always kind of looking at you. And he had this motto, like, if you don't work, you don't eat. You're like 10 years old. And he's like, carry cement, do this, do that.
He's treating you like a man.
Yeah.
Certainly you're a child.
And I ended up being in a life. So I don't have a dad. I don't have a mom. And I got,
And he used to be fond of a particular pastry.
Yes. So believe it or not, one of the things that we did with my tú eres malo, Ramon. One of the things that I mentioned that a little bit, but I used to be sweating, walking around, and I used to look in the store and be like, "Hey, abuelo, can I have a totomonja?" And that was a little pastry that they put butter on, and to me that was my dream. And he was like, after a hard day of work, we could have a totomonja. I mean, I cannot even translate it because it's one of those things that I guess was an inside joke in the DR. But when you translate it, you're like, that's a pretty crazy name for a triangular shaped corn pastry. And you got to put butter on it. But hey, we all have our taste.
We'll just call it cornbread.
Cornbread. Buttered up cornbread.
So after that, there was a day that I said, I just can't live like this anymore. And I was always imagining stuff. In my school, I wanted to be like the emperor because my dad always had stories of generals in Vietnam.
You had a vivid imagination, clearly.
And Che Guevara. So I was like, that's my destiny. And they used to call me Che Lucas, right? So I'm like, I'm going to be a big guerrilla fighter as well. So I used to go to the school and make my little medals with the battle caps, like I used to take the different color ones and I used to try to do medals. And they were like, Trujillo used to do that too. I'm like, I'm gonna be better than Trujillo because he was I'm different than him, blah blah blah. And I basically control my entire schoolyard.
Leadership.
I will get the biggest guy. And one time I was like, I need money to run my organization because I got the muscle, but we can't even buy a Coca-Cola. So one time I found this kid, Junior, and, we used to get 5-10 cents a day. And one time this kid busted out with 5 pesos, right? $5. And I was like,
Your eyes just lit up.
Yeah, my dad works for Pepsi Cola and this is what he gave me. And I was like, come here. You're my vice president. My generals weren't happy, but I got
Junior, promoted.
I got little Junior who was like barely spoke Spanish, one of these kids that the parent decided, I'm going to put you into a Catholic school with all these other regular Dominicans. And then life was great. We really ruled the schoolyard. We were doing well. I thought my life was finally doing well, but every time I went home, I was a slave again. So I was Emperor Lucas in school and the slave to Efrain. And one day I said, I got to do something. So I started putting ants on my grandfather, right? And I was like, I don't know. I got bored. And I put one ant and another ant and nothing happened. And I was like, my God, he doesn't feel it. So I'm like, I need one with a bigger head and one with a bigger head and a bigger head. Eventually he tells my cousin, hey, I got like these little legs here, running on my neck. And he goes, you're full of ants. Lucas did that. And my grandfather chases me, throws his cane at me. Just as I turned around like the Matrix, caught me right in the middle of the forehead.
Oh, man.
And I got this diesel bump. And I used to have this like reddish, really slick hair, as you could tell now. But I had this reddish hair. So I'm in dinner and I'm like hiding the big lump on my forehead, combing there. And my family's like, what the heck's wrong with you? So when they saw that, my grandfather was like, I don't want him here anymore. So they call my mom. Everybody's in panic. And they're like, well, you know what? Let's move him to the deep hills next to El Pico Duarte, a place called Mata Grande.
In the highest elevation.
You see one car a month.
Right.
And my uncle had a crazy uncle that just like the farther he could live from civilization, that's what he liked. Yeah. He was like, I don't like people and I want to be far away from anybody. And the neighbors were like half an hour walk each neighbor. So they sent me there as city boy. And I remember saying like, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. He's like, go outside. And when I went outside, there was like this crystal clear, pool and a waterfall. And I started loving it because I never had freedom. You always had the four walls of the cities. So I started organizing all the hillbillies into a guerrilla army, and I was ready to take over the world. And then my mom came and said, hey, we're going to to the United States because at one time I had hit myself with a machete in the leg, and they said they're going to cut my leg off.
Oh, man.
So my mom had to come as an emergency. I had this big black leg, almost gangrene, all black, and I just needed antibiotics. But in the hills, they were just putting patches of stuff on me, like, aloe vera or little
Leaves
powders. And that
stuff,
thing just
yeah.
kept getting infected.
Dirt.
Yeah. So after
Dirt,
like
right.
5 or 10 shots of penicillin, she fixed me up. Took me to the United States, and I was so pumped. I come to South Philly. I'm like, I'm coming to America, but I'm going to South Philly's in the 1980s. It looked like World War III.
Yeah.
Literally, it was like burning buildings and stuff. You can imagine how tough the 80s was. So I was like, wait, this is not what I thought. And I used to watch this show called Who's the Boss? And it used to be about Connecticut.
Tony Danza, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, I loved, what was the name of the lady, the star?
But Mona was it?
Tony Danza, but his daughter, that she was like a
yeah.
big famous. Everybody was always
Yeah.
Melissa Milano.
Yeah, Milano.
Yeah.
That's her.
So that was my dream, and I was like, this Connecticut place is like green. It looks like a little bit more like Mata Grande. I don't like this thing because over there was pit bull fights and people barely surviving. Some of the gangster people used to be like, hey, let me just let the pit bull loose on people for fun, because that's what you do in the ghetto. You got nothing to do. And you just came to that, and I never been exposed to that kind of violence, and in school it was wild. So eventually we made it to Connecticut. My uncle was a trucker. He makes it to Connecticut like in 87, 88. And I actually ended up in Danbury, which I've been there now for 40 years. My mom was the first Latina hairdresser. I went to Western, Danbury High Western.
WestCon, yeah.
I graduated from that. Then I went to Sacred Heart for my master's to be a teacher. I tried to then apply, as I mentioned before, in Danbury because I wanted to teach in Danbury High, and I was like, pretty cool to be with my Dominicanos here, which is like 10,000 of them over there. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get a job, so I started working at the Bridge Academy at a charter school in Bridgeport. That's where my affinity for that model came through because I said, wow, this is cool. We are taking kids that used to come in like little gangsters looking at you and then pretty soon they were lawyers, doctors, 100% graduation rate.
Transformation.
And I loved transforming these kids. And I was tough as heck, but I was also their best friend doing their capstone projects and things like that. So I spent almost 23 years of my life doing that. And then I moved into this story where I am now.
Yeah, that's an incredible journey. And just I can see the leadership from a young age. And assembling teams from a young age. So give us as we go into the home stretch here, give us some of the impact you've made, maybe statistics or a case study or a success story of someone that's come to one of these centers and how it's changed their lives.
Yeah, so there's so many. I think right now about 500 people are, being able to take free English classes in all of our centers. Hundreds of them have become citizens. Thousands have gotten health screenings and checkups and things like that. And hundreds have become active in the civic duties in government. People that never knew how to testify. We were able to send every year like 250 at a time to go testify in Hartford and become leaders. Many have run for office. Some of them are now, in the Board of Educations and things like that. We know some of them, and you probably know Catherine Cruz. She was one of the people that were just a volunteer, started being in our center, and now she was like, I have a roofing company and a this and a multi-service. So many of those examples of people that came in, felt empowered. All they needed was like that little push or those little resources, and they've been able to create businesses, become leaders, grow with us. Some of them were just volunteers who now are running centers for us and have become a big integral part. But we have touched so many lives, and I just think that this April 12th, when we're doing like our 4-year anniversary, we're bringing in about 300 of these leaders, right? So we're taking all the people that were integral to the organization of LEAD, and we're going to just have a celebration of that because so many people have been touched, not just myself, who thought that I had hit the plateau, and from then I was just gonna.
You had no
relax.
idea your real purpose was on the other side, right?
Yeah,
it was on the other side of no. So many great themes. I think you touched on the importance of branding. When you're pitching an idea, and just also like thinking bigger. One of the things I loved about your story was they said no to the charter school, but then you go ahead and and build this amazing organization. Well, charter school is just one part of it. So it's like you came back way stronger with a way bigger mission. And so sometimes those dead ends, I think, lead us in the direction we're supposed to go.
Yeah.
And they force us sometimes to think bigger than we originally thought.
And I thought that was big, that if you get stuck on one thing, right? If I just said, we're just here to open a charter school in Danbury, and that's all we ever did, I think we probably wouldn't even exist. Because sometimes people say, you know, what's your value? But the idea of remaking ourselves and getting bigger, when I say, why are we just in Danbury? You know, why can't we be in every city?
Right.
That was a big leap, and people look at you like, are you crazy? I'm like, well, if we did it once, it's like McDonald's. You can just replicate it. And it gets easier once people replicate it. The creating of other legs, right? Like our own charter school, the Taino Collab, that was another step that we say, we're still going to be fighting for Danbury. It's still something that the block has already been bought. Millions of dollars have already been invested. And that's a community that we have given our word that we will never stop fighting for that. But there are other things that we say, you know, we have our own model that we've now launched and we got approved for the fellowship and other things that we continue to do for the candidate training program. Let's just continue. Every time I tell people, the biggest advice is never get satisfied with your laurels. Never rest on your laurels saying, hey, I already accomplished that. In all my offices, I have a guy walking upstairs. And that's my idea, my philosophy is, you know, you get to that step, you celebrate, great, and you got to move to the next step. Right. You never just stay there, because I could be like, oh, I did this, I did that. Like right now, I feel like I haven't accomplished anything. Yeah. I'm already looking at what's the next thing that I have to do. And that keeps you excited. That keeps you fresh. That keeps you always going for more. And that's a big key of success. It's not just staying at a plateau, but always looking for what else can I do to move things. And my last advice is find whatever it is you're doing that's working and just do a lot more of that. I learned to cut the noise. Sometimes people come with 100 things and I go, nope, this is what's bringing me the things. I'm going to just do more of that. I got to ask, what can I do to bring me more of this? Because you can't get sidetracked. You can't get diluted. And I really wanted to be able to do more. Amazing.
I think that's a great piece of advice, to keep climbing. Also, stay in your lane. Focus on what you're good at. If you're good at it, something's working, do more of it. All of those are great takeaways. I have to ask you, because we didn't get too much into history, but if you had one like historical quote or one person in history that inspires you the most, who would it be?
Well, for this work, it ended up being Simón Bolívar. Simón Bolívar had a dream to unite all Latinos into a massive force. And the United States and England decided that's too scary for all of these people to be a mass. And they decided to break us up into 21 little pieces. And to me, that's an inspiration that, yes, he died depressed. And he died in San Helena because, you know, everybody broke on, you know, Peru, Ecuador, everybody just started fighting. The only thing he was able to organize was like Gran Colombia, three countries for a small period of time. Mm-hmm. But what an inspiration, right? Because he saw beyond. And even though that dream was not realized, that's where I think is the spark that we have. That it's like, we're going to start in Connecticut, but we're going to be working towards that dream. And we're doing it. We're bringing groups that have never worked together, right? We have the Brazilian Community Center, and Brazilians never were part of it. And I tell them, yo soy brasileiro de coração, right? Like, you got to make them feel like, why weren't you part of it? So my question was like, oh, Brazilians don't participate. I was like, why? Well, their language is a little different, and their culture is a little different. So how do we make them feel like they're part of that family? And we're like, we're going to build them a center inside a center so that they can feel. And we're all going to even learn a little Portuguese and make them. Right. And now the Brazilians are part of the family. And we know that Dominicans are super independent. And every time you did something, they're like, Latino, Dominicano. And we're like, oh, boy. So we got them the Dominican American Coalition of Connecticut, right, with Ramon. And then they feel super excited. And with Puerto Ricans, you know, Puerto Ricans United. And
by the way, thank you for allowing me to display my artwork that night. That was very special. Very grateful. And that was great. And we like to bring, right, leaders like yourself to all these centers. But that makes people identify themselves, right? Yeah. We bring that day that we spoke, we said, let's do an art of Dominican roots for that community. And that community feels so validated, so important. But then we do it. I tell people, when it's Ecuador independence, I'm Ecuadorian. And then I'm Brazilian. And then I'm Colombian. Because what I try to tell people is, you are proud to be of Connecticut, but you also proud to be in the United States. And that's what I want Latino to think.
be proud to be from Puerto Rico, but be proud from the bigger identity called, Latino, and bring everybody in, because if we stay divided, we're always going to have nothing. But united, we are a massive force, and that's what we're trying to show in Connecticut.
Absolutely. So tell our listeners that may want to donate or visit, how can they find out more about LEAD?
So we have ctlead.org. That's our website. And all the handles are the same. CTLEAD. CTLEAD. And LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're basically everywhere you can imagine. And all of these links have the ability for people to reach out and ask if they want to visit one of our centers, if they want to just, have a conversation with us. We respond pretty quickly.
Excellent. Well, Lucas, thank you for being on our show. Thank you for being the great leader that you are, and continue fighting the good fight for our communities.
Thank you, Ramon, and thank you, Secundino. You guys are pillars de la comunidad dominicana.
Absolutely.
It's our pleasure. It's our mission.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
And keep going and keep growing.
That's right. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of Mission Control. Until next time, this is your host, Ramon Peralta with Peralta Design, and we launch brands.